Hello friends, I'm really excited for this video because I'm going to be talking about my dedicated period, practice exams that I took, how I laid everything out, what practice questions I did, what resources I thought helped me the most, and this is a video that I was hoping could be really helpful to a lot of people because I'm going to try and hit on a lot of questions that came up as I was studying for it, that I was asking my upperclassmen and friends, and then a lot of questions that I've been getting thrown my way about dedicated from TikTok and from YouTube. So I'm hoping that this one video can clear up a lot of questions and help guide people as they're preparing for STEP and for COMLEX. And I'm also going to be very transparent about the scores that I got in all my practice assessments, because that was one of the biggest questions that came up for me, is you're getting 50%, 60% on assessments, and these numbers, especially in the beginning, mean nothing to you, so I had no idea what it meant, where I stood 3 weeks out, 2 weeks out, and so I'm going to show my practice scores and the trajectory of my scores, most importantly. So if you're confused about the scores that you're getting, hopefully you know that I passed both, and so you can look at my scores and you can follow the same trajectory and kind of make your own decision on whether you're ready to sit for either exam. But yeah, hi, if you're new here, my name is Camilla, I'm a third-year medical student in the United States, and let's jump into what my dedicated looked like. Okay, so I thought this would be the clearest way that I would be able to show everything by calendar view. I'm going to start this off by saying that I took both COMLEX 1 and Step 1. COMLEX I took on the 25th, and then Step 1 I took on the 31st. I gave myself 5 days in between. In the moment it felt very cramped, but after I took both, I was really glad that I only gave myself a little bit of time in between because I was starting to really burn out by the end of this. And I also built up such a good stamina after taking COMLEX 1 that I felt very prepared going into Step 1 when it was just 5 days away. And I'm going to try to do this in like a Q&A format because I think that's going to be the most clear. How many practice assessments did I take before dedicated? Basically, my school provided a couple of practice assessments that I took through school, and then I also took some practice assessments on my own, and this was pre-dedicated, so this was still while classes were going on, while I still didn't know a lot of the information. First thing I did was the COMAT. That was January 1st, and I got a 206. The score that I needed to pass that was set by my school was 190, so I passed that. About a month after that, February 5th, I took the AMBOSS assessment. It's free. I don't remember how long it was, but I remember a lot of people recommended it, so I took it. And I got a 183, and the score to pass that was a 196. Then I had another school COMSE. This was our first COMSE, and COMSE is basically like the equivalent of the COMLEX, and that was on February 21st, and I got a 407. The score that we needed to pass was a 350, and the score that they say you need on the actual COMLEX to pass COMLEX is a 400. So I got a 407, and that was technically already passing the COMLEX, so I felt like I was on a good trajectory there. February 29th, so like a week after that, I decided to take the UWorld self-assessment. So I bought UWorld for the question bank, and it also came with 3 self-assessments. And I took the first self-assessment, got a 39%, which was very low, and I think the score was 149, and the score to pass was 196. So I did miserably on this one. UWorld was always really hard for me. Also, I want to say that in total, I ended up taking 17 practice assessments from January all the way up until May 31st. March 13th, we had our second COMSE. Again, this is through the school, and I got a 332. I went from a 407 to a 332, so I basically had a 70-point decrease, but I chalked it up to just coming back from Mexico from spring break, and so I said that that score was a fluke, so I didn't count that at all. And then now we are in April, so the last school assessment I took was March 13th, and now we get to April where I start taking all of my practice assessments. Okay, so in this period I took 5 NBMEs, 3 COMSEs, 2 TrueLearn assessments, 2 free 120s, and that's it. Okay, so starting with April 2nd, I took NBME 26, and I got a 40%. And then I took another NBME on April 18th, and on this one I got 52%. So I took 3 NBMEs in a row, and this was officially in dedicated now. Before that, the first 2 NBMEs that I took were during, we still had classes and stuff, but I just did on my own time. And so on the third NBME, I got 52% again. I also took the NBMEs starting oldest to the latest leading up to STEP, and I ended up skipping 1 NBME because in total you have 6 NBMEs offered at a time, and when I started it was 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, 31, and I ended up taking 5 out of the 6, so I skipped 27. I should have just skipped 26, just the oldest one, but yeah, because the more recent, the more closely it probably resembles the actual exam, so I would focus on taking the most recent ones. Okay, so now that we are in dedicated, I had another COMSE again through school. This was already in May. For this COMSE, I got a 415. At this point, we had to get a 450. That was set by my school. If you got a 450, you were allowed to sign up and sit for COMLEX, and I got a 415, which, once again, to pass COMLEX, you need above 400, so technically I passed COMLEX, but I didn't get a high enough grade to be able to sit for my actual exam. And then at this point, TrueLearn emailed us that they had 2 free assessments that they came out with for COMLEX. I took one of the TrueLearn exams on May 3rd, and then I took another TrueLearn exam on May 8th. And then for the TrueLearn exams, I got 71%, and then on the second one, I got 55%. The TrueLearn exams, the hardest part about these is I think they were 180 questions, and you could not take a break. You were basically sitting there for 4 hours, and if you wanted to take a break, if you wanted to go to the bathroom, you had to do it while the clock was running down. So kind of unfortunate planning on their part, but these were really helpful. They were filled with OMM, and I needed to practice the OPP OMM knowledge for my COMLEX, so these are really good. I like them. Okay, and then I took 2 more COMSEs. I took one on the 10th and then one on the 17th. The COMSE on the 10th is when I finally cleared 450, and I got 503. So before this, all the COMSEs were bought by the school and provided by the school. This last COMSE on the 17th was the one that you could buy off the website yourself, so I paid the $60 myself. This was a COMSE that I've never seen before, so I took it a week out from my exam because this was going to be the most accurate score that I was going to get heading into taking the real thing. And on this one, I ended up getting a 435, going from a 503 on the 10th to a 435 on the 17th. Made me panic a little bit a week before the exam, but once again, 400 is still passing, so 435 meant that I had passed COMLEX and with a buffer of 35 points. So I got a 435, a 503, a 415, so I had already passed COMLEX 3 times in the month of May, so I felt like that justified sitting for the exam, even though I did go down like 70 points. And I'm saying this because if you end up in the same position, don't stress going down in points. Sometimes it's a fluke, you're tired, you're burnt out. Sometimes it's the exam and what knowledge they choose to test. So this is not a reason to panic, and just trust your scores. Trust that you've passed the exam multiple times already and that you're going to be fine. So this was actually the end of my preparation for COMLEX. This was the last thing that I took in preparation for that. I took 2 more NBMEs. I forgot I took an NBME before the COMSE, and then I took another NBME after the COMSE. So on the NBME on the 14th, I got a 61%. So this was the first time after my NBMEs in April that I had finally cleared this into the 60s. So you get a percent score, and then you also get a percent for what are your chances of passing if you took a step within a week or something like that. And so I got a 61, which meant that I now had a 90% chance of passing. And then the NBME on the 20th, I got another 60%. So what I'm going to say here is if you go on Reddit and you look up what percent chance of passing do you want, what percent do you want to score in NBMEs before you sit for STEP, a lot of people on Reddit are going to tell you that you want to score in the 70s, which is 98-99% chance of passing STEP. So obviously that's really good. 70 on any exam is passing, and going into an exam knowing that you have a 99% chance of passing is just amazing odds and something that you really want. But this is the period where I really struggled to get my scores up. I took that first NBME, I finally cracked into the 60s. I thought the next NBME that I was going to take, I was going to do even better, so I was going to show improvement, and I got a 60 again. This was a week before STEP, so this is where I really started panicking, because everyone was saying that you have to get a 70 or above, and I'm 10 percentage points away, so I'm nowhere near. I have a week to try and make up 10%, that's not going to happen. And so I asked around, I asked people if anyone sat for STEP when they had scored in the 60s, and there were some people that responded and they said, yeah, I never scored above a 65, or I never scored above a 63, and they said, I've bit the bullet and I ended up just taking it. And so with these NBMEs is where I was really thinking of whether I should push step back another week or so or just sit for it. And the thing that really solidified sitting for step in my mind was the free 120s. And the free 120s I ended up taking on the 27th and the 29th. So at this point, once again, I felt like I was comfortable sitting for COMLEX, so I was done with all the COMLEX assessments. So once I finished COMLEX, I gave myself a day to recover. This is where everything felt very crammed and stressful because I only had 5 days, so I had to fit in these 2 free 120s in the 5 days, also recover from COMLEX, and just get ready for step. So there's a lot going on, but I still don't regret only having 5 days. Maybe like a week, like 7 days would have been better. But so I took 1 day to rest after COMLEX, then I took the first free 120, and this is the new free 120. So there's 3 free 120s floating around right now, I think, and the new one, the newest one, you find on the NBME website, and you actually take it, like, you can click on the computer, whatever, it's interactive multiple choice, and they give you a score. That's the newest one. But then the older versions are floating around that you can find somewhere on Reddit. That's like a PDF. So I had to put that into OneNote and like manually write in my answers and stuff. So it was like paper and pencil. So that's for the old one and like the old one. As far as I know, there's only 3 versions, and I only did the 2 because I didn't have time, and I also didn't feel like doing 3. So the first one that I took on the 27th was the new one, and I got a 65%. And then on the 29th, I took the old one, and I got a 72%. So it was interesting because what a lot of those people told me, the people that ended up sitting through step with 65% or lower, is that what gave them the confidence was the free 120s that they took before step. And this is because they said that they scored in the 60s on the NBMEs, but then they took the 120s and they jumped into the 70s. And the free 120 is supposed to be the most accurate assessment for step. So what you get in the free 120 should be the closest thing that you're going to get on step. So I had the same exact thing happen to me that they were talking about. So I got my 60s on the NBME, and then the free 120, after a week, I had a 5% jump, and then I had basically another 5% jump. So I finally got into the 70s. So getting into the 70s a day before step, I was like, that's it, I'm going to take it. Also because I was so burnt out at this point. If I had pushed it back another week or so, I don't think I would have made it. The questions that I got was, what was the highest NBME score that you got, which was a 61? Did you feel confident sitting for step? I did. The highest grade I got was a 61. I sat for step and I ended up passing. What gave me the confidence was the free 120s going up to a 65%, 72%. And looking into resources in terms of assessments, what I'm going to say, for step, the NBMEs felt like they were hard and confusing, and sometimes I didn't know what the diagnosis was from the paragraph or what they were getting at, and sometimes I didn't even know what all the answers meant. So to me, these were hard. These were like UWorld assessment hard. The free 120s felt a lot simpler. It felt like the concepts that they were testing were simpler, and they were long, so you have to get used to the question stem being really long, which step 1 did have longer question stems, I felt like, so similar to the 120. But the thing about the free 120 is it was so straightforward. So you were reading a long ass paragraph, but it made sense. You knew what they were asking, you knew what the diagnosis was, you knew what all the answers meant. So it was very straightforward, and that's how step felt. Step felt not as confusing as an NBME, but the concepts were just as hard as at the NBME. But it was as straightforward as the free 120, but the concepts were harder than the free 120. So if you can do both the practice NBMEs and the free 120s, put them together in your head, and that's step. For COMLEX, the COMSAs are probably the best tool. I felt more underprepared going into COMLEX, because when I sat for COMLEX, I was like, this shit is so confusing. I had so many questions that I was like, the answer could be anything. Like, I couldn't even narrow it down to 50-50 sometimes. I was like, it could literally be one of the 5 that's listed, and I don't know. Like, it was that confusing, and the COMSAs felt like they didn't prepare me well enough for what I was faced with. True Learn assessments also, they were easier than the COMSAs in my opinion, but they gave me a lot of practice questions, and I liked them. They were good enough. Yeah, so I definitely recommend doing both COMSAs and True Learns. The other question that I got was comparing your NBME scores to how you're going to do on COMLEX, or comparing your COMSA scores to how you're going to do on step 1, and that is not comparable at all. Keep the NBMEs and the free 120 separate. That's only going to show how well you're going to do on step 1. and your Comms and True Learn assessments are only going to show how well you're going to do on COMLEX 1. So don't confuse the two, because they don't apply to each other. The other thing that I get asked a lot about is what question banks I used. So I bought UWorld. I know other people bought Amboss, but I know some people bought both, and I knew I wouldn't have the time, and I also didn't want to spend all that money on question banks that I knew I wasn't going to get through. So I only bought UWorld, and then our school bought the True Learn ComBank for us. And another big thing people talk about is being able to get through an entire question bank, so completing 100% of UWorld before you sit for STEP. I completed 45% of the True Learn question bank and 61% of the UWorld question bank. So I wasn't even able to get through one, let alone both questions. I feel like you get a lot of pressure, people everywhere saying you've got to get to 100%, you got to get to 100%. If not, do the entire question bank and then do all your incorrects, or do the question bank twice. Like, to me that's really crazy. I did not have enough time, so once again, True Learn I did 45%, and UWorld I did 60% of the question bank. And then how many questions did I do per day? I started doing questions around January because I felt like I just wanted to get into the swing of things and like see what questions looked like and start to be able to like apply my knowledge into doing a question. And so January to beginning of April, I probably did like 10 questions a day, and I kind of took it easy. Like, I didn't put pressure on myself to do questions, so 10 a day. If I felt good, I did 20 a day, and then if I didn't feel like it, I just didn't do any questions. April is when I started to, since I was doing like my practice assessments and stuff, I started doing questions a lot more often too. I started doing about 20 questions a day. By the end of April, when Dedicated started, or nearing the beginning of Dedicated, I started doing 40 a day. And then that end of April and all of May, I did about 60 questions a day. And I tried to mix in UWorld and True Learn. At some point I was doing only UWorld, and then closer to COMLEX I started to mix in True Learn as well, because you need the OPP, you need the OMM, and you also just need to see the different ways that UWorld and True Learn asks their questions, because STEP and COMLEX asks their questions in two different ways. So if you only do UWorld and you get used to the way the questions are being asked and how the answer choices are being presented, then you get to COMLEX and it's very different. So you do have to do both. And the week leading into COMLEX, I only did True Learn, so I stopped doing UWorld because I wanted to be in that mindset of how a COMLEX question is asked. I only did True Learn. And then the week leading up to STEP, same thing. I only did UWorld. I stopped doing True Learn. Also, in terms of Anki, I was asked how many Anki cards did I do per day? Did I finish all the cards? Basically, I did Anki for the first 1.5 years every day, so I got really good at doing cards. I was doing up to 1,000, 700 to 1,000 cards a day, but when I got to Dedicated, I realized that I was focusing so much on Anki that I wasn't doing enough questions. Like, when I was doing only 20 questions a day, that's because I was trying to get through all my Anki cards, so I was still doing 1,000 cards. And when you get to Dedicated, it's really important to do the practice questions and not the Anki cards. So what I started doing is I limited myself to 400 Anki cards a day, which I could do in about hour and a half. And so I would limit the Anki cards that I would do, and the rest of the time that I had, I would do practice questions. So again, I limited my Anki cards to about 400 cards a day, and the closer and closer I got to COMLEX and STEP, the less and less cards that I did. I maybe did 100 cards. The other thing that I did on Anki is I realized kind of late that they have a high yield tag, and so at some point I completely switched over from doing the cards that used to always just come back to me daily, to only doing those high yield tagged cards, which I think is pathology, micro, farm. That also helped ease my mind that I wasn't just wasting time doing random cards, but it felt like I was doing the cards that I was definitely going to see on my exams. In terms of a study schedule, I didn't really have a regimented schedule that I had every day, same thing, whatever. I'm a big proponent of going with what your brain and what your body feels like, and not pushing through when you don't want to do something. So if I woke up and I didn't feel like doing questions first thing in the morning, I would do Anki cards, and vice versa. Oh, another thing is, what supplemental materials did I use to review content and stuff? A lot of people ask me if I actually used the USMLE textbook. The biggest thing that I used for content review here was Sketchy. I had already finished Sketchy Micro at that point, and 60% of Sketchy Farm, but what I really started using was Sketchy Path, and I was watching those videos If I felt like I wasn't doing really well in GI, I would watch all the GI path videos, and then I would do practice questions and say if I wasn't doing well on the GI practice questions, then I would do my GI cards. So basically I was just trying to hit that area multiple times in order to bring that entire section up. So sketchy path was a big thing. I also did sketchy biochem for biochem review. That helped me so much because biochem with like arrows and pathways and what leads to what leads to what just doesn't stick in my brain. So being able to see it in a picture for like Hurler and Hunter, glycogen storage diseases, lysosomal diseases, sketchy biochem was fantastic. I cannot recommend sketchy path and sketchy biochem enough. And then yes, I did use the USMLE book, and I tagged it with little bookmarks and went back to a lot of the charts that I kept forgetting and stuff like that. I never read it like cover to cover like some people do it, where you give yourself a goal of doing like 30 pages a day and you actually read through all of that. I'm not a big textbook reader. That's why I really preferred Anki, and Anki is basically exactly like the book but just in flashcard format. So no, I never read the book like that. Only if there was something specific that I had to reference, I would put a bookmark there and I would come back to it and review it at a different time. The great thing about the book is, this is the part of the book that I really used and that I wish I looked at longer because I didn't get through the whole thing, is there's a high yield review section way at the end of the book, at the very end, and it's maybe like 20 pages where they just give you like little facts and bullet points. And what I did, it's 2 columns, so it gives you the presentation and then the disease or something like that. It goes through farm, biochem, all the stuff. And so what I did is I covered one side of it, and so I'd read the presentation and then I would try to remember what the disease was, and I did that literally like a day before taking step as like a fun little thing to do. Instead of doing Anki or practice questions. That was really good, and I didn't get through all of it, and I wish I did. So definitely review that high yield system. That would be my advice. This is another big thing that I did that I think helped my scores go up, is every time I would do an assessment, say you do the NBME, at the end they're going to give you a chart or whatever of the percentages of how well you did for each category. That being stuff like genetics, biostats, biochem, and systems, so like GI, respiratory, cardio, immuno, whatever. And what I did is basically for each one of those, I would take my worst 3 and I would write it down, so I would have it in my planner, my worst 3 sections, and those were the sections that I was going to hit the hardest before I took my next NBME or practice assessment. And what I mean by hit the hardest is what I mentioned, where I would go to Sketchy or any other third-party resource you use. I would watch those videos, I would do practice questions only specifically for that section. GI was like my trouble section for whatever reason. So I watched all those videos, I would do only GI practice question sets, and then I would do as much GI Anki as I could get through, and then I would do that for each one of those that I had as my worst 3, and then I would take the next assessment. So then the next NVME that I took my new worst 3, and sometimes it's the same thing. Like a lot of times GI had reappeared multiple times, and so I kept hitting GI. So I rewatched those sketchy videos multiple times. I kept doing the Anki. I think I finished all the GI Q-rolled questions because I did so many. But a lot of times there would be new worst sections that would reappear. So all of a sudden I was doing the worst at repro, and so I would repeat that strategy for repro. But that's how I could see the change, because I saw the worst sections that I had all of a sudden trend up, and they would be somewhere mid, and then all of a sudden they were my highest because I was giving them that attention, and so they moved up. So that really helped, hitting your worst areas to boost your score. Another big thing, so the first 2 weeks of dedicated, so I think the end of April and beginning of May is when I watched the first 3 chapters of Pathoma and did all those Anki cards, because people told me to save those for the beginning of dedicated because of how high yield they are, and they really were high yield. Those first 3 chapters have all your malignancies, cancer, neoplasias, oncogenes, so like a lot of the stuff that really was high yield and that I saw both in COMLEX and in Step were in those 3 chapters. So I did those first 3 chapters in the beginning of dedicated, and I got through them as fast as I could and the cards as fast as I could. But as a warning, those chapters are really long in length and time that you're going to spend watching them. They're very dense in content, and they each had so many Anki cards associated with them. I don't remember how many Anki cards I ended up getting through, but I did not expect there to be that many cards. So just know that you're going to spend a lot of time on those. So if you feel like you need more than a week or 2 in the beginning of dedicated, consider starting that before dedicated earlier so you're not trying to cram all that as you're doing everything else. Also, I didn't mention reviewing your practice exams. Obviously, very important. Everyone's going to tell you you have to review your practice assessment after you took it. And a lot of times what I did is if I felt like I still had the energy, and for like the smaller ones, like the True Learn ones, the free 120s, they're shorter, so I had time to review them the day of. So I would literally take the assessment, I would take like 1 to 2 hours break in between, and then I would go and review it. The COMSIs I wasn't able to review because they were provided by the school. The NBMEs were long, so those sometimes I did try to do the day of, sometimes I'd split them, and usually I would just do them the next day. And when I was reviewing these, what I did is I would search up the Anki cards and I would try to unsuspend the Anki cards, or I would take notes on concepts that I regularly miss to go back and watch a video on it. And then the other thing that I started doing that I thought was really helpful for me, and this isn't going to be helpful for everybody, but closer to the end of dedicated, instead of unsuspending cards, I actually started keeping a notebook with my notes. So I basically used it as Anki, and I even made it line by line. Like the first line I would ask a question or something and give the presentation, the second line was going to be my answer. And this was more so I didn't have to try and find those Anki cards if I wanted to quickly remember what I got wrong. And I wouldn't have to do like 400 Anki cards to try and work through that. I could just flip to that part of my notebook and remember, oh, this concept that I get wrong a lot, and I can just look at it really quick. And that notebook I read multiple times, not every single day, but I definitely reread all those pages that I wrote right before taking COMLEX and then right before taking STEP. So that was like my quick little cheat sheet guide. Oh, another really big thing that like really helped me and carried me through school in general and pre-dedicated and dedicated was being able to study with my friends. Dedicated got so hard and it gets just so emotionally and mentally taxing that you have to just push through every single day, and the thing that's going to help you get through is your friends. And I did a lot of my assessments with my friends, and there's even a function on UWorld where you can create quizzes that both you and your friend can take at the same time. So I did that in tutor mode, and that really helped because A, you have someone there keeping you accountable, doing it with you, it's more fun. B, you have a person there that's, you know, as smart as you are, and so if you don't understand something, they might know it and they're gonna explain it to you. They're benefiting because they're regurgitating the information. You're benefiting because you don't have to go read through the long description and potentially still not understand the answer. You have this beautiful person who can explain the concept to you, and that's what we did. I don't know how many of these quizzes I did where I did it with somebody, but that was so helpful. That I cannot recommend enough. The only thing with that is if you guys have different questions that you have worked through previously, sometimes if I make the quiz, my friend might get repeats of questions that she's already seen before, and vice versa. If she makes the quiz, sometimes I'll get repeats. But in the beginning, when I didn't do that much of the deck, that was fine. I was fine with doing a repeat question because sometimes I had no idea that I even did that question. I wouldn't remember it. So it was basically like doing another question again. It also tested to see if I had, you know, consolidated that knowledge and learned from getting that question wrong to see if I could get it right this time. So all in all, it worked well. But if you get closer to the end where you've completed majority of the deck and you're starting to get too many repeated questions, that's when it starts to kind of become a negative. And once it kind of reached that point for us, I stopped doing it. But at that point, I was done with dedicated, so it worked out well. And the other big thing for me was taking practice exams with friends. I don't think I've really taken a single practice exam by myself without one of my friends or one or multiple of my friends taking that same practice exam the same day. And the benefit to that is you get to review the practice exam with your friend, and I promise you it goes so much faster when you're reviewing it with your friend than when you're reviewing it alone, because the NBME specifically has shit explanations. So if you try to go and read through their explanation for why you got a question wrong, you'll be more confused than when you started. So I was saved so many times by a friend who could just quickly tell me why they got this question right instead of me trying to understand it. That is golden. Take your practice assessment with your friends, and you don't have to be next to each other, you don't have to be in the same room. Literally just take it the same day, and the next day review it together. Okay, I think I've exhausted the things that I wanted to say about dedicated, about practice assessments, about scores, about preparing for this. Hopefully I've gone through everything. I tried to give all the most important things and just like the lessons that I learned from this process. So hopefully in any way, if this can help anybody, I will be happy. If there are questions, if something else comes up, if I forgot to mention something, just like DM me or comment or something, and I will try to answer it. But yeah, my goal for this video was to be so transparent, because it got to the point where I had one friend who sent me her practice exams and the dates that she took them and the scores, and that was like the only person that did that for me, and that helped me tremendously. Like the amount of times that I went back to that note just to see what I got the assessment versus what she got, not to like compare and be like, oh, she's smarter or she's doing so much better than me right now, but it was just such a nice way to like map out my trajectory, like to see the score and be like, okay, I'm not that far away, I feel like I'm doing fine. And that's really helpful once you get to the point where you have to make the decision of, are my dates good for when I take the actual exam? Because you have the option of pushing it back, but that means extending dedicated, that means less summertime, that means paying a shit ton of money just to push it back a week. So there's a lot of questions that start coming up the closer you get to your test dates, and that's where I wish I had something like this to look at and be like, okay, this is like my map, like this is gonna guide me to see if when I take my exam is right and whatever, and if I'm ready and blah blah. I'm hoping that this is going to be helpful in that sense. And I made other TikToks in terms of like how breaks work and how I felt the questions were, and those are on like my TikTok and stuff, so I'm not going to go into that. But yeah, this is all I can think of, so I'm going to end it here. I hope it was helpful. If there's anything else, please ask, and I'm so happy to give advice in any way, as much as I'm capable. Thank you so much for watching. Good luck studying. These exams are both such huge beasts, and you've worked your butts off for 2 years to get to this place, so it's amazing. It feels great to be on the other side. It feels really amazing to see all of this knowledge come together and see how much you have learned after these 2 years. It's all incredible. You're gonna make it through. Dedicated sucks. It's so emotionally and mentally and physically taxing. My body was breaking down sitting at a desk for this long, but you're gonna make it. The little light at the end of the tunnel is clinicals, when we're all gonna be in a hospital and we're going to get to apply that knowledge and take care of real patients, and it's so close. Yeah, you're gonna make it. Enjoy the process, enjoy the learning, and good luck with everything. You got this.